Gambit. The journey of a solo Gambit movie is a rare example of how multiple wrong decisions can turn a promising project into a disaster. It all started in 2014 when producer Lauren Schuler officially announced her intention to cast Channing Tatum as the lead of a new X-Men spin-off franchise. The actor had been considered for the role since 2007, but now he finally signed the contract. Fox treated the project as a priority. They plan to introduce Gambit in X-Men, Apocalypse, build a standalone saga, and even reposition Tatum as one of the new pillars of the brand after Hugh Jackman's retirement as Wolverine. But trouble started early on. The choice of writer kept changing, directors turned down the project, and Fox began clashing with its own expectations. The planned budget, very high for a heist-style movie with a sexier tone and less saving the world, raised internal doubts. To make things worse, Fantastic Four 2015 failed massively, leading the studio to drastically cut Gambit's budget. Rupert Wyatt, the director at the time, left the project, claiming he didn't have enough time to rewrite the script after the budget cuts. From there on, chaos took over. Doug Liman stepped in, rewrote everything, and also walked away months later. Gore Verbinski came on board, but left due to creative and scheduling conflicts. When Disney bought Fox in 2019, Marvel evaluated the project and quickly scrapped it. After 5 years of back and forth, Gambit was officially canceled without a single day of filming. The actor later appeared in Deadpool and Wolverine, and it was confirmed that he will play Gambit again in Doomsday. The Amazing Spider-Man 3. When Sony released The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the expectation was to create a shared universe as grand as Marvel's. The studio already had release dates set for The Amazing Spider-Man 3 and 4, along with spin-offs like Sinister 6. But instead of solidifying this ambitious plan, the second movie had the opposite effect. Lukewarm reviews, box office results below expectations, and clear audience fatigue from so many poorly developed story arcs. Sony tried to rush the creation of a shared universe, stuffing the second film with villains, setups, and teaser scenes. But that excess came at a cost. The narrative fell apart, and audiences noticed the studio's rushed approach. At the same time, backstage drama began to surface, including rumors that Andrew Garfield had disappointed executives by not attending an event in Brazil, which reportedly strained his relationship with the studio. The final blow came in 2014 when the Sony hack exposed internal conversations revealing negotiations between Amy Pascal and Kevin Feige to reboot Spider-Man within the MCU. The failure of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 made that option even more appealing. As a result, The Amazing Spider-Man 3 was delayed, then reworked, and eventually abandoned. When Tom Holland was cast as the new Peter Parker, the Garfield era officially came to an end. Ironically, years later, his appearance in No Way Home reignited fans' affection, but his third movie never came back into the picture. Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer has always been one of the most anticipated characters to get a solo movie, especially after his debut in Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. However, even with scripts in development and attempts to move the project forward, Fox was never able to start production. And just when it was finally ready to make the film happen, Disney bought Fox. Before the acquisition, Fox was trying to revitalize its Marvel characters after the failure of Fantastic Four. Silver Surfer was among the priorities, since his cosmic mythology could expand the studio's cinematic universe. However, the studio faced creative difficulties. The 2007 movie left a divided impression. Audiences were less engaged with the brand, and Fox had a growing list of shelved projects like Gambit and The New Mutants. With the deal finalized in 2019, all Marvel characters returned definitively to Marvel Studios' control. Fox's projects were evaluated and almost all of them were canceled, including the solo Silver Surfer movie. Marvel's priority became rebuilding the Fantastic Four's presence in the MCU before delivering individual stories for its characters. Currently, Silver Surfer is being reimagined by Marvel Studios, which has already cast Julia Garner as Shalabal, a variation of Galactus's Herald. With that, Fox's old project officially died. Spider-Man 4. And going back to Spider-Man, Sam Raimi already had everything lined up to close his saga in grand style. The movie took its first steps in 2008, but what was supposed to be the franchise's peak got lost in a turbulent creative process. Raimi and Sony simply couldn't agree on the story. Scripts went back and forth. James Vanderbilt wrote one. It didn't work. David Lindsay-Abaire rewrote it. Also didn't work. Then they tried Gary Ross, and still nothing. Meanwhile, some backstage rumors started to surface. The movie would have Vulture as the main villain in a more brutal version, and John Malkovich was practically confirmed. Mysterio would also appear in a quick comedic moment, and the coolest part, he would be played by Bruce Campbell, who had already made cameos in the other films. And to top it off, the initial plan was to shoot Spider-Man 4 and Spider-Man 5 back-to-back, with Tobey Maguire fully on board. But as the script stalled and the schedule tightened, Raimi realized he wouldn't be able to deliver the movie he wanted. He walked away and Sony canceled everything in 2010. Parts of the material were then reworked into what would become The Amazing Spider-Man. Ghost Rider. Despite Nicolas Cage's charisma and the character's visual appeal, Ghost Rider 3 never became reality, and most likely never will. The first two films were produced at a time when comic book adaptations were still searching for an identity, and that shows in the inconsistent tone, dated CGI and PG-13 approach that limited the character's dark potential. Even though Cage committed to the role, the movies were heavily criticized and became examples of an outdated era of superhero cinema. When Marvel regained the rights to the character in 2013, the focus shifted to repositioning him in a new context. The company recognized that any direct continuation of the old films would create inconsistencies and prevent the character from gaining the seriousness he deserves. That virtually eliminated any chance of a Ghost Rider 3. Another factor is that Marvel chose to introduce new versions of the character, like Robbie Reyes, and was well received by part of the audience. In addition, the studio is interested in exploring the supernatural side of the MCU, with characters like Blade, Elsa Bloodstone, and Moon Knight. And inserting Johnny Blaze or Reyes into that context requires a completely new approach. Nicolas Cage could still return in a multiverse cameo, but never as the lead of a third movie. The Incredible Hulk 2. Imagine a Hulk 2 with Edward Norton. Yeah, that almost happened. The original plan was to continue exactly where the 2008 film left off. Bruce Banner trying to control the Beast, without knowing if it was a blessing or a curse. Norton wanted something more psychological. A thinking Hulk, self-aware and full of internal conflicts. No just non-stop fights and green CGI. The script would have explored Banner's mind, fragmented memories, flashbacks, and yes, Betty Ross's return was practically guaranteed. General Ross would also have a bigger role, pushing Hulk closer and closer to the edge. And the villain? The leader. Samuel Stearns was all set to become the big-headed mad genius we know from the comics. Tim Blake Nelson even had a contract to return. The problem? Internal clashes. Classic Hollywood. Norton wanted a more auteur-driven move. Marvel wanted something more in line with what we're used to seeing. Result: arguments and a tense atmosphere. The press went wild, and shortly before the Avengers, Marvel let Norton go. The switch to Mark Ruffalo was final, and even with Ruffalo, the movie had no chance. Disney bought Marvel, and due to bureaucracy, Universal still held the distribution rights to solo Hulk movies. Imagine Disney making a movie so another company could profit? Never. In the end, The Incredible Hulk 2 became just a giant MCU what if. The origin of Magneto. X-Men Origins. Magneto had everything to be heavy, intense, different from anything Fox had done before. The idea was to explore the villain's entire early life. Concentration camps, trauma, the awakening of his powers amid horror, something much darker than Wolverine Origins. The script was in the hands of David Goyer, who helped write Blade and The Dark Knight. The vibe would be almost like a historical thriller. Magneto on the run from the Germans, hunting the scientists who tortured him, meeting mutants along the way, and later crossing paths with Charles Xavier, but in a very different context from what we saw later. Michael Fassbender was already the top choice for the role, but Ian McKellen would possibly appear as a narrator, linking past and present. Then came the downfall. X-Men Origins. Wolverine was released, and it flopped. Making another Origins movie suddenly became a risk. If Wolverine didn't work, who could guarantee Magneto would? But the final blow came from the 2008 writers' strike. Production stopped, scripts unfinished. Several movies were canceled as a result, and Magneto's was one of them. When Fox got back on track, they decided to change everything. Instead of a solo film, they reused the material in X-Men First Class. The Jewish past, the German experiments, the hunt for Dr. Schmidt, all of that came from the canceled movie. In short, Magneto did get his story, he just never got his own movie. Fox's Avengers. Yes, this almost existed. Before the Avengers changed the game, Fox was already planning its own mega crossover with the heroes it had in hand. X-Men, Daredevil, Deadpool, and the Fantastic Four. One movie with all of them together. Chaos? Yes, but delicious chaos. The script was written by Zack Stentz and Ashley Miller, the same writers behind First Class, and the director being considered was none other than Paul Greengrass, the guy behind The Bourne Supremacy. That already says a lot about the tone. Shaky cam, aggressive action, espionage-style storytelling. The plot involved a global incident that would put mutants, vigilantes, and scientists on a collision course. Reed Richards would play a central role, with Daredevil as the more grounded hero. Deadpool would show up as the chaotic element, and the X-Men would come in as a political military force. Sounds like Civil War. Something along those lines, but before Civil War. Why did it die? Simple. The Fantastic Four rebooted from scratch in 2015. Daredevil went back to Marvel, Deadpool blew up on his own in theaters, and Fox's universe became an impossible puzzle to line up. When Disney started negotiating the purchase of Fox, everything stopped for good. In short, this crossover would have been Fox's alternative MCU, but it died on the shelf. X-Force. Before Deadpool took over the movies, he almost appeared as a villain in X-Force. Yes, a villain. Jeff Wadlow's version was darker, younger, and heavily inspired by the 1990s comics. The focus wasn't Cable and Deadpool like we later saw. The stars would be a team of young, public school-style mutants. The team's mission was to cross rural Texas, facing mutant and military threats. Cable would be the grumpy leader, half mentor, half absent father, and Deadpool would be the mercenary hired to hunt the team down, wearing his classic suit, red mask, and with zero censorship. After the success of Deadpool in 2016, the project was revived with Drew Goddard. The vibe changed. Now it would be Cable plus Deadpool plus a new team, but more faithful to the comics' sharp humor. Goddard was extremely excited until Disney bought Fox. Then came the mass cancellation of projects. Rob Liefeld even revealed that the plan was to turn Cable into the emotional core of the movie, expanding his backstory and setting up a trilogy, but it never happened. Today, X-Force lives on as the franchise's biggest almost. The team did appear in a comedic way in Deadpool 2, in that chaotic scene where everyone dies. Sinister 6. Sony had a dream to make its own villain team, like an evil Avengers. And Drew Goddard, director of The Cabin in the Woods, had a plan completely different from what Sony was doing at the time. The movie would be set in Andrew Garfield's The Amazing Spider-Man universe. The ending of Amazing Spider-Man 2 already set everything up. Dr. Octopus's arms, Vulture's wings, Rhino loose, Harry Osborn in charge. Sinister 6 would have a kind of heist movie tone, with villains forced to work together on a crazy mission, like Suicide Squad, but without the government and with more chaos. Goddard wanted a fun, weird, and unpredictable movie. He actually wrote the full script. Andrew Garfield read it and was extremely excited. Everything seemed to be on track. But then Amazing Spider-Man 2 didn't perform very well. Sony went into crisis, and in 2015 the deal with Marvel happened. Spider-Man would get a new reboot. Avengers: The Kang Dynasty. Avengers: The Kang Dynasty was supposed to be the MCU's big event in 2025, but it turned to dust after everything fell apart behind the scenes. The initial idea was massive: a multiversal war, Avengers from every era, X-Men showing up, the Fantastic Four joining the chaos, and multiple Kang variants wreaking havoc. The movie would even place Spider-Man as a central piece, even though it wasn't clear exactly how, possibly as the thread connecting broken realities. A version of Superior Iron Man played by Robert Downey Jr. was also part of the plans. On top of that, TV characters would have major roles: Moon Knight, She-Hulk, and Sam Wilson's new Captain America. Marvel wanted to mix everything, literally. Then came the turning point. Jonathan Majors, the actor playing Kang, became involved in a massive controversy, was accused of assault and harassment, and was convicted. The studio backed out. Since Kang was the foundation of the entire saga, Marvel abandoned the plan altogether. The original director, Destin Daniel Cretton, had been working seriously on the project, but stepped away when everything collapsed. The movie died, making room for Avengers: Doomsday, with Robert Downey Jr. as Dr. Doom at the center. Daredevil Divvy. This movie is a classic case of a sequel that always seemed like it was about to happen, but never even came close. The 2003 film with Ben Affleck as Matt Murdock tried to deliver a dark vibe, but the result didn't really please audiences or critics. The tone was kind of awkward, the emo soundtrack was over the top, the script felt rushed, and Affleck himself has admitted he doesn't like remembering that phase very much. So it's easy to imagine he wasn't exactly excited to come back, even if Fox had approved a sequel. Interestingly, despite everything, the studio tried to save the universe by creating an Elektra spin-off, with Jennifer Garner reprising her role. But that movie was received even worse, which basically killed any hope of expanding that universe. The final blow came when the rights to the character returned to Marvel, officially ending whatever was left of the Daredevil 2 project. If the sequel had happened, it likely would have explored Kingpin more, possibly bringing Bullseye back. There was also speculation about introducing characters like Echo, or even an early version of the Defenders, but it all stayed in the what if category. The good news? The death of that movie opened the door for the Netflix series in 2015, which delivered the definitive version of the character and erase the trauma of the 2003 film. Venom spin-off, 2008. The Venom spin-off almost became reality even before Marvel Studios existed as we know it today. After Spider-Man 3 introduced Topher Grace's Eddie Brock, Sony got excited about expanding Sam Raimi's Spider-Man universe. In 2008, the studio began developing a solo movie for the symbiote, with a script described as darker, more violent, and more grounded. Very different from the more jokey Venom Tom Hardy plays today. Paul Wernick and Rhett Reese, the writers of Deadpool, wrote a full version of the script. The idea was to show Venom as a brutal anti-hero, dealing with questionable morality and facing darker threats than Spider-Man's. But at the time, Topher Grace was basically out. He didn't want to return to the role, and Sony considered recasting and reinventing the character. The project became even more confusing when Gary Ross came in to rewrite the film while also working on the Spider-Man 4 script. The creative mess only grew. When Sam Raimi finally walked away from the franchise, everything collapsed. The Venom solo movie, Spider-Man 4, and any parallel plans. The studio's solution was radical, a full reboot, which led to The Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, completely erasing Topher Grace's Venom and that original universe. Fantastic Four 2. Fantastic Four 2 is that classic case of, if the first one already went wrong, why insist? The infamous Fant Four Stike tried to reinvent the team with a darker, more adult tone, but the result was one of the biggest disasters in superhero movie history. Chaotic behind-the-scenes drama, heavy reshoots, the director clashing with the studio, everything worked against the film. Even so, Fox kept Fantastic Four 2 on the calendar for a long time, as if they believed they could turn things around. The truth is, the reboot failed at almost everything. Lifeless characters, a villain with no presence, weird visuals, and zero sense of family, which is literally the core of the Fantastic Four. Critics tore it apart, audiences ignored it, and the studio didn't know what to do. The actors had potential, but it was clear no one was excited to continue the chaos of that production. When Fox realized there was no way to save that universe, quietly canceled the sequel in 2015, and that opened the door for Marvel to regain control of the franchise years later. The sad part? The reboot cast never got a real chance to show their talent with a good script, but the good news is that now the Fantastic Four are finally in the right hands. So then, if you could bring back one of these canceled movies, which one would it be? Let us know in the comments. Honestly, I'd really love to see The Amazing Spider-Man 3, but I think that's unlikely to ever happen. On screen, there's a video showing the best transformations in superhero movies. Click and watch. See you there.